just meeting with a client who I'm going to be showing TechnoTutor to in the beginning of June. And I was sitting down with the son. He's in 7th grade right now. He goes to a $20,000 a year private school. And it was really interesting because they had asked me over there on a referral from one of my other clients. And he was asking me some questions over his math final for this year. So I was just kind of getting to know him and talking about, what he was going over and seeing kind of where he was at. And he was telling me that he had a really bad headache and he wasn't feeling too well. And I was like, oh, why don't you feel well? Is everything okay? And he's like, well, it's just my focus medicine. That's what he called it. And I hear that so many times when I meet with families and kids, and they always call it focus medicine. I'm talking about, like, I think this one was Focalin. Focalin is a methylphenidate, and I'm pretty sure it's the same thing as Ritalin. I think Ritalin is the same thing. But I was asking him more about, why do you take that? And he was like, oh, well, I have trouble focusing and everything. And I said, really? I said, do you have trouble focusing, like, when you're playing video games? And he's like, no. I said, what about when you're playing sports or watching TV? He's like, no. And he's like, but I like those things. He's like, and I said, yeah, why don't you like schoolwork? He's like, well, it's not easy, right? And I'm like, yeah. We got into a really cool conversation, and I was basically just explaining to him enough so he could understand kind of where I was coming from as to how I could help him, really. Because ultimately, what I wanted him to understand was that it's not because you are stupid that you're having these issues in school, or it's not because you don't know how to focus. It's because you don't have the foundational knowledge and skills for that stuff to come naturally. And so we talked about that a little bit. And then I sat down with his mom and we talked for a little bit as well. And one thing that was really interesting talking to the boy, and remember, he's in 7th grade, right? And he was like kind of complaining about just school in general and saying that it was really stupid. And I said, yeah, I know. And he was like, really? Because he wasn't expecting me to agree with him. And he was like, really? And I'm like, yeah, I think there's definitely something wrong with school too. He was like, really? And I was like, yeah. I was like, well, what do you think about it? And he's like, well, I don't really understand what the point of it is, right? So we talked about it for a bit, and it was really interesting because at one point he said, so it sounds like what you're saying is the whole purpose of school is just so you can get a job. And I was like, yeah, that is what it is. And he's like, it's kind of weird that they're doing that with us when we're like this young, that they're like just trying to prepare us for a job. And I was like, yeah, that actually is kind of weird. I never really, I think about education a lot, obviously, that's the field I'm in, but just to hear a child say it, so like to him, you could see with a child, it's like, this doesn't make sense. Why am I doing this thing all day that's just to prepare me for a job? And I'm only like, 13 or whatever years old. And the reality is, the education system's not even really teaching you anything about what you're going to need when you have a job if you decide to get a job. Like, everybody has to work at some level. Not everyone necessarily. Well, yeah, even everyone. Even if you don't go get a job where you're making money, let's just say you're a mother and you stay home with your children and you raise the children, that's work. That's, in a lot of cases, more complicated than many jobs that already exist. It requires a lot more patience and understanding and creativity and focus. And there's a lot of jobs out there where you can just basically sit there and you just get a paycheck at the end of the day, or 2 weeks or however it works, right? But the point is, like, when you go to school, what of what you learn do you really actually use later in life? Very little. And if you look at the research, they've already shown that they can predict a child's 3rd grade performance by the time they're 4 years old. So it's not really anything you're learning in school. It's your foundational education at home in basically the first 7 years of your life that's going to predict whether you do well in school or not. So there's not really a lot you're learning in school. School is actually a system that's filtering people based on the education they got at home, the foundations that they got at home. So the real purpose of the education system in terms of school, why is it structured the way it is? It's really just designed to see who can, one, take in information, memorize it, and repeat it back just because an authority told you to. And second of all, who can handle being bored for long periods of time without complaining and still be there, able and willing to follow the rules. That's really the purpose of the school system. There's not a lot of value in it beyond that. Unless perhaps you go to like a very elite school where you're around a specific peer group and you're taught a lot of self-discipline. But even if you're in that situation, generally you've already got a lot of that from your home environment anyways. And it's interesting because when you look at like Katie and my son, Max, he's already basically developed all the skills and knowledge up through first grade. And he's only 2.5. He's 2 years and 7 months. So why would he go to school? Because, I mean, he's only 2.5. So by the time he's 5, what do you think he's going to know? You know, like, I took him to the mechanic one time because I was out with him and my check engine light on my SUV came on. And I decided to just go to the mechanic and just make sure it wasn't a big issue because we were planning on going to the beach the next day. So I took him with me, and we were there at the mechanic for about an hour or so while they checked things out. And it ended up not being a big deal. It's just my catalytic converter needed to be replaced. But I was explaining to Max like what a mechanic was, what they were doing with the car, what they were checking. They replaced some of the headlights, or they replaced the headlights. And I was explaining to him, for example, that a mechanic is an auto mechanic is somebody who understands how cars work, and they find and identify problems in cars, and then they repair or replace whatever needs to be replaced. If there's a problem, they fix the car. They're able to take it apart, put it back together. They understand how it works. That's why I explained to him what a car mechanic was. Well, then the other day, he climbed up on our big, countertop in the kitchen, and he started taking all of the heating elements off of the stovetop. He was like reaching in there trying to take them off. They weren't hot or anything. I was just doing the dishes. And he was like asking me to take the part where the pots rest. I don't even know if there's a name for that. Like the little metal grid, right, that sits over the burners. He asked me to take those off so he could mess with the elements. So he was taking the, like the ceramic plate that sits on top, or some metal in some cases, and then like the actual heating element where like the gas comes through. He was like taking all those little pieces off of the stovetop and putting them on the countertop. And then he was like putting them back on in where they go and like mixing them and matching them and do all that stuff. And I was just like, it was the first time he ever did it. And I was like, what are you doing, Max? Just to kind of see what he was thinking he was doing. And he said, I'm a fire mechanic, Dad. Right? And I said, why do you say that? And he said, because I'm fixing the fire. Right? Like he was putting them back, taking them apart. I'm just getting a call there. I mean, look at the level of reasoning ability and so forth that would be required for a 2.5-year-old to make that connection. And what's interesting? If you come and you spend some time around us and around Max, you'll notice he never talks about anything imaginary. I'm not saying he doesn't use his imagination. Like he'll, in that case, for example, say he's a fire mechanic. He'll use his imagination, but he doesn't talk about things that aren't real. Right? He's not talking about dragons. He's not talking about, you know what I'm saying? Like unicorns and shit like that. He doesn't talk about TV shows because he doesn't watch TV. He's not talking about TV characters or Mickey Mouse or any of that stuff. He's like walking around in his environment and interacting with it and asking about how things work. And we always explain to him how things work. And so the student that I was talking to, I was explaining to him a little bit about Max and just showing him, that it could be different And it's not because you're dumb that you don't know these things, it's just because you didn't get this stuff in the foundational years. And it's nobody's fault per se, it's just that's the way it happened. And so when I sat down and talked to the mother, and I kind of gave her my assessment of where he was at, and I talked to him, he does have some attitude issues towards school, like he feels like it's not for him, it's too difficult, he doesn't like math and all these things. And I said, I can absolutely help you with these things. I said, but it's not in the same context as you're probably expecting as what you might be expecting from a tutor. So I'd like to sit down with you, take some time over a little bit of, take a little bit of time, and we set up a time for it where I can come and show you everything that we're able to do. And I'd like to have him there so he can understand too. So he can see clearly what it is we're suggesting and see why that it doesn't have to be the way he feels like it is right now. And so we agreed that we're going to chat on like, I think the 4th or something, because they're dealing with school finals and all that stuff right now, so it's a very stressful time, and I could see the stress all over the kid, and it's just like school imprints children with stress. Like, learning has to be stressful, and it also imprints this false idea that if you just go through 12 years of something, that suddenly you know something. So you look at people, they go through 12 years, they get a diploma, everyone's happy, everyone's proud, they're so excited. But what is everyone so proud of? You basically just sat in a room and you showed up for 12 years. But what can you actually do? What value can you really actually add to your fellow human beings' lives, to society? What value does going to school actually bring to society, other than stratifying society and creating a situation where people associate learning with just stress or being bored or like all these dysfunctional things? When that's not what learning is at all. There is a certain type of learning that takes place from reading a book. But the real learning process is when you take that knowledge and that information and you put it together in a new way, and then you go and you apply it somehow, and you make mistakes, and you realize, like, fuck, okay, that didn't work. That's not what I thought was going to happen. And you don't give up and you try again. And I'm about to go into another client's house. And let me just show you. Okay. I'm somewhere called West University. These are the kind of clients I work for. I don't know if you can see that. Right? Probably can't see it. All of my clients are multi-mega millionaires. Okay? I don't work with poor people as a primary point. It's not to say that if you don't have a lot of money that you can't get involved with what we do. You can. Absolutely. But the reason I'm bringing up the point of the type of clients that I work with is because what I'm trying to get you to see is that even the people who have lots of money, that are very wealthy, they still have the same issues with their kids. The only difference is they're in a $20,000 a year private school, and that kid is automatically going to go to a $20,000 a year high school. And because he's in that high school, he's going to be in a certain environment. He's automatically going to go to college. And when he gets out, he's going to have certain opportunities because of the networks that his family's in and that he's going to make in college and so forth. It's not because they are actually doing anything fundamentally different. The only difference is they have money to put towards the problem. And what I'm telling you is, if you would take a clue from that and realize that even these wealthy people are realizing that even in these $20,000 a year private schools, their kids are still struggling. They're still trying to force them with medication. And they're coming to me and saying, what can you do to help? And I'm showing them TechnoTutor, and they're like, holy shit, finally an actual answer. And I have kids that I work with in these families that are in kindergarten and can't read, in first grade and can't read. And within 3 months, the teacher's sending home letters to the parent saying, what is going on? Like, how did they jump up 3 levels in their reading in that short period of time? It's because they're using TechnoTutor. It's the only difference. That's the only thing that they're doing differently. Right? There's a reason why people in these positions are doing it. Right? This family I'm about to go in and talk with, and just kind of follow up with them. The dad is a really famous, not famous necessarily outside of Houston, but he's a very successful corporate attorney. right? And they live in this mansion here on a very prominent street in Houston, right? And what I'm telling you is we have the tools to give you the most effective, elite possible education. And even if you don't have a lot of money, you need to talk to me, because you can't afford in this world that is now being created to just put your kid in school. They're going to eventually force you to have vaccines if you're in school. They're going to eventually force you to accept transgender, LGBTQ, all that stuff. And look, I don't have a problem if somebody's gay or transgender. That's not the issue. The issue is when you have somebody who has an agenda of trying to force everyone into a certain mindset about something. That's the problem, right? It's not about what any one particular person does with their life in terms of their preferences. It's about taking certain things and subverting them and using them to control other people's minds and behaviors, and then defining certain things as okay to say or not to say. That's like a dictatorship, right? So if you're just going to go with what the system is giving you as education, you just have to understand that your children are totally fucked if you do that. And I'm telling you, even the people who are very wealthy in this world know that their kids are totally screwed by the education system, which is why they're now doing more. So you can't afford in this system now, especially with all the automation and everything that's coming. Ford just announced that they're not only doing their self-driving delivery service that they're implementing, they're going to have two-legged robots that carry packages to your doors when they deliver it with a self-driving car. So it's time to wake up. Brenda says, what is the system TechnoTutor? It's called TechnoTutor. TechnoTutor.com. And if that's not clear, you can just send me a private message and I'll give you more information. Okay, so I'm going to go because I have to go into this meeting here. But see my shirt? 1984, right? It was a documentary of the future. It's not just a science fiction book. All right, so it's time that we really increase our information processing skills, because if you can't process information effectively in the 21st century, then the information is processing you. Okay, you got to realize. All right, everybody, take care. I'll see you next time.